Dude, I am so much cultier than you. You have no idea. I brought not only my best friend in high school into the truth, like where he actually got baptized and is still a witness to this day. I also brought my worldly girlfriend into the truth as a teenager, and she also got baptized.
Oh, man.
So, yeah.
Is that the cultiest thing that you have done? Or
That's not even the cultiest thing. No, I don't think. That's pretty culty, though. So, I don't
These are the times we will all remember. Were you there? What did you do? So what do you say? We need to clean this place up?
Thy kingdom come.
Think celestial, making the celestial kingdom your eternal goal.
Listen to me now. Listen to me now.
And he is not permitted to evaluate
innuendo, half-truths, and lies.
Go to some weak sauce, liberal, Democrat, baby butchering church, but do not come back to this one ever again until you repent.
Doubt is a tool of the devil designed to weaken us.
Repent! Repent! Repent!
You are listening to the new Heretics. Shame on you.
Yeah, how should we jump in? Maybe we just did.
yeah.
Yeah, but I have the same problem with writing. It's always the like
How to start.
and I'm a writer. Yeah, it's the first sentence, right? It's like how do you just get over that initial like hurdle? But hey, we made it. We're here. We're kicking off the inaugural episode of the New Heretics podcast. My name's Nick Barron. I'm joined by my co-host Logo. This has been a while in the making. A few months we've been kicking these ideas around and discussing what we would want to do if we turned some of our afternoon chats into a podcast. If people find that to be valuable, maybe a place to start is with a little bit about who we are, and then we can get into what the idea for the show is and why we felt like there was maybe a space for this pod, the content that we want to discuss and focus on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Logo, and where you sort of come into this from?
Yeah. So I'm Logo. Kind of keeping it pseudonymous. Kind of like that whole aspect of pseudonymity for various reasons, not just for protecting my privacy, but I always found like pseudonymous figures kind of cool. Like people like there's a thinker, his name's Kierkegaard, and he uses like a lot of pseudonyms because in a way he can be ubiquitous and kind of hide behind many masks and represents I think he wrote like his entire doctoral thesis on Socratic irony, and he did it under like the pen name of like his name literally means like ironic man or something like that. His professors hated it. His professors were like, never write something like this again. Like, you're super smart. We know you're a really talented guy, but like, just never submit anything to us again. They were really, they really did not like that about Kierkegaard. But
so even back then, professors had no sense of humor.
Yeah. And I really like that aspect because I think with conversations that we've had, you've seen that I kind of tend to be a little bit more reserved about like my ideas and stuff. And I try to not be, I try not to be flaky, but I do try to maybe be contrarian or maybe be a little bit Socratic to kind of move a conversation along. So
it's something that I find very helpful because like, I know like in our conversations, you would drop stuff on me, like I think anytime you're talking to somebody you don't know very well, you're sort of trying to figure out frame of reference to like approach this person with, right? Like a lot of times, like, especially if this is like an online debate or something, if like we got to know each other over Twitter basically, and then having conversations outside of that, but usually like, you're engaged with somebody because you start debating a topic. It might be like atheism or something like that. So all you know about this other person is like they're a theist or an atheist. And with that comes all these like assumptions about what they must believe. And something that you did with me early on that was maddening to me, but like super helpful, I think, as we got to know each other, is you would just say stuff that just seemed on its face to me to be like completely contradictory, or like just stuff that like it would totally throw a wrench in what the position that I thought you were coming from. And it got me to really respect the fact that you really should listen to what people have to say and listen to the points they're making, and not make all these sorts of assumptions about what they might believe on the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that does come from the fact of like how, like my background, like my educational background, like I went to school for philosophy. Currently still in a pursuing like a postgraduate degree, and the way that I have to like address certain things, it's the same issue, right? Like the whole, I can't just jump in with a certain set of assumptions. I have to kind of like take a moment, reflect, and see like the problem that I'm addressing. And I think that that's like super important. I think it's an aspect of critical thinking that a lot of people don't, especially like in high control groups, right? Like you kind of just take the dogmas and you don't really move past them. Obviously, critical thinking is kind of discouraged. So it's one of those things where it's like, even when like you're debating online or something, like it's maybe not best to present all of your cards at once. And it's always good to kind of like be like a worm or something, like squirm around, like present something, and then when they think they have you, like you mentioned, like bring up the next idea, and it's like, oh, I know that you were thinking I was going down this line of rhetoric, but actually that was just to kind of flush out maybe an implicit presupposition or something.
Right. And just to give a concrete example of what we're talking about here, if this sounds a little bit confusing to anyone, like, so you would say something like, I'm a Christian. And then when I would press you on something, you'd say, I'm an atheist. And I would be like, wait, is like, you gave me like, you were sort of actively giving me cognitive dissonance. It was like, wait, what do you mean? Like, these seem like contrary positions. And this would happen sort of over and over and over again, where it got to the point where I realized, oh, like I can't just assume anything about what your position is on any of this. Like we have to just have a conversation about the point at issue, or the topic we're debating. And that made me realize how much I do that in conversation and in debate, how much I am constantly making assumptions about what people think. Which I always thought that I was somebody who didn't try to do that. I thought I've been a person who tried to avoid that in my life. In fact, this was like kind of a tenet of my kind of my I don't know, personal morality that I would tell people is like, you really should try to not make so many assumptions about what other people think all the time. Even as a witness, I would say this. And then I realized, like our conversations and the more I kind of engage in online debate over the last year or two, like I do it all the time. And it's very problematic if you want to actually get anywhere in a conversation.
Yeah, it's kind of everyone really does it. And I don't think people are aware to the degree that they do it as much, and then simultaneously how much baggage their own position, their own views kind of have, like how much they're just assuming or taking for granted about their own beliefs or positions. So I think that it cuts both ways, right? Like the assumptions that we make about other people and the assumptions that we even make about our own beliefs.
Cult questionnaire.
So we've come up with a list of questions that we want to asked to introduce our guests on the show. And so we should probably pilot that ourselves so that people can get to know us a little bit. So, Logo, what's your cult status?
Nice. My current cult status is faded, super faded. Yeah, I left my high control group. I was part of what is known as the Jehovah's Witnesses. I left about 8 years ago, so right at the cusp of graduating high school. I left probably like about a year into college, and yeah, it was pretty much an easy transition in my fade. Not that the deconstruction portion, like the deconverting, it's not like that was easy, but it was. I feel like there wasn't a lot of obstacles to overcome, and like in terms of like me stopping going to local gatherings, people questioning like where I was at. Like people knew that I had gone to school. So for me, that process of deconverting was facilitated by the fact that I had left my hometown to pursue higher education, and because of that, my deconstruction kind of followed a natural process through the progression of higher education. Like just, I felt like almost like the growing up that you do in higher education in some respects was kind of mapped onto directly to my my deconversion. And so yeah, I'm pretty much faded 8 years now, and what we call in the Jehovah's Witness community, I'm a full POMO, physically out.
POMO. Sweet. Yeah, so for clarification, there are different cults and ex-cult activists use different terminology, I think, for different stages of deconstruction that they might go through in their process. But yeah, from an XJW framework, the common terminology is to state whether you are physically in or out and mentally in or out, or questioning. And then the combination of those letters makes an acronym. So we have PME is physically in, mentally in. PMO is physically in, mentally out. POMO is physically out, mentally out. And then various iterations of those. And there isn't necessarily like a hard and fast rule here. I think generally speaking, you use the term faded. I think that's also a term that a lot of people that leave cults will use to kind of describe whether they've made like a firm break from their organization, whether they've taken a stand, maybe with family, maybe with the organization itself in some kind of formal declaration that they're leaving the cult, or whether they just sort of stop going, just kind of drift, and people sort of are checking on you and wondering like, is everything okay? And you're like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. Like, but you never really kind of take like a firm stand against the organization. There can be a number of reasons for that. There could be financial considerations. There could be various kinds of family considerations. There's all sorts of reasons that a person might choose to fade instead of taking maybe a more aggressive or like a firm approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess with that, what's your current status?
Yeah, I would consider myself POMO also. All of the important people in my life know that I am no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. We have the same background there. That would include my family and my close friends, but I am not currently disfellowshipped. Disfellowshipping is something that Jehovah's Witnesses do that requires family and anyone who's a baptized Jehovah's Witness to shun the person who's disfellowshipped. I have not come forward to the congregation and made any kind of declaration of my intent to not be a witness anymore, and so I haven't gone through that process. A lot of people that are POMO are disfellowshipped also and actively being shunned. I'm in a pretty fortunate position with my family. Both of my parents, even though they are very active Jehovah's Witnesses, are still willing to have a relationship with me and are willing to talk to me, and not really a whole lot has changed since I told them that I didn't want to be a witness anymore. But that is definitely not the case for a lot of people when they leave. And it actually wasn't even the case for me at other times in my life. I was disfellowshipped twice in my 20s. And in both of those cases, I had a much more difficult relationship with my parents. And there was a lot of sort of separation there that was enforced by their religious beliefs. And even mine at the time, because even as a disfellowshipped witness, I still wasn't questioning it as the truth. That happened, at least where I admitted it to myself somewhat later.
Awesome.
So we're both in the same cult, so this will apply to both of us, I guess. What was the best thing about our cult?
You want to go first, or should I go first?
I guess I'll go first. This is tough. I think it's an important question, though, because as therapy has taught me, like there's a reason that if you have an addiction or you have a real strong ideology that you found that has a hold on you, right? You get something from it. Like there's a reason that somebody is an alcoholic, for example. Like it's not all bad. Like there are good things that you get from it, and that's why it's really tough to kick, right? And I think the same is true with a cult. For me, I think the two big things for me that I miss, and that is largely why I'm doing this podcast, I think, is the certainty I had that I didn't need to worry about anything that happened in life. I didn't need to worry about my health. I didn't need to worry about whether somebody died. I didn't need to worry about whether a war was breaking out or whether there were financial problems. Like, to me, my worldview, first of all, anything bad that happened was actually a positive thing, because that meant we're probably one step closer to a paradise earth, right? So Jehovah's Witnesses believe that we live in the last days, and that we are moving inexorably and quickly toward a conclusion of those last days, the War of Armageddon, and then that will bring about a paradise earth where we will live forever, those who make it through, as perfect humans in perfect health. So things like for example, I'm overweight, and I have been my entire life. I never cared. Really. Like, I never took my health seriously. I never really thought it was something. It was like a inconvenience, like at some point, like I couldn't play basketball anymore, and that was kind of a bummer. But like I just would replace that with, I don't know, playing video games or cards with my friends or something, right? Like, so there were things there were preferences that I had, but I didn't feel like it was like an important thing that I like pay attention to my health, that I like lose weight and like really like take my health seriously. Because I mean, honestly, if I die at 45 of a heart attack or whatever, who cares? That's just like a free ticket to the new world. Is really how I thought about it. That may not be a universal view among all witnesses, but I know that at least in my friend group, that you really can see that kind of a mentality like has taken hold of a lot of people, and it really causes them to not take the life that they are living now very seriously. So yeah. I would say it's not necessarily a positive thing, because I don't think that's true anymore. And so now I see it as a negative. But as a witness, it was an unbelievable like anti-anxiety pill to take, right? Like, you just like literally, I never felt like I had to worry about anything. And I honestly was confused by how people could have so much anxiety in their life, just generally. It was like, it was kind of a what me worry like mentality. Like, really, who cares? So I miss that, even though now I realize it wasn't taking me down a good road. I also miss just the really close friendships that I had. I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. I was a fifth generation on my dad's side, fourth generation on my mom's side. So we go back pretty far, like to the Rutherford days on my dad's side. And I just, my entire world, basically my entire social group, all my friends, all people that I grew up with from the time we were little, and a lot of us remained close, like even into my 30s and 40s. And even a few of them I'm still good friends with today. A couple of them are still being cool with me and willing to to stay my friend, even though I've made a decision to leave. So it's really hard to replace that. No matter what ideology you were born into or you come out of, like if you get to a point where you have to break free of people that you've known your whole life and are like practically like family to you. And in some cases, I had friends that were closer to me than my own like flesh and blood family. It's not easy to lose those relationships, and you really can't replace them. I mean, you can find new friends and a new community, and I'm taking steps to do that now. You're one of my new good friends, and like I'm really happy that we've connected, and you've had a big impact on my life already in the short time we've known each other. But yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing, and I think honestly that's probably what keeps a lot of people in that would leave otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of echo that, I think, yeah, the friendships are definitely something that, I think it's like the biggest thing that attracted me to it, right? It's a sense of community. You don't have this anxiety about feeling like you need to fit in because that's already kind of like carved out for you. So you don't need to worry about like who you're going to hang out with. If something happens in your life, you know that you have a social group that's going to be there financially, emotionally. Even if that comes with the caveat, looking back now, I mean, this wasn't obviously something that was present at the time, but it was always with the caveat or the understanding that you have to believe what we believe for you to be able to benefit from that sense of community.
Right.
Because obviously now, even though that community was great, a lot of the people that I used to talk to, I don't talk to anymore. And it's not even because I'm formally disassociated or because I'm disfellowshipped. I'm not actively shunned. It's just they don't know what your status is. So why would they talk to someone who they don't know is good association or not? There are some people who I still continue to have contact with, and in fact, some of my close family who are still active witnesses. I still talk to them. Like, they know that I'm not that I'm not active, but I think that for them it's justified that they could return, especially now with some of the updates that our previous religion, our previous cult. Some of the changes have been that they don't have a dogmatic stance about whether or not those who are in or out will be, in quotes, destroyed at the end of the world, what they call Armageddon. They don't take that dogmatic stance anymore. The stance is more like, as long as you have last minute repentance, it's kind of A-okay. As long as you repent, as long as at the last moment you acknowledge that our cult was the correct one, you're okay. So I think in their minds, they justify their friendship with me with, oh, he could at the last minute return. So for better or for worse.
I actually used this argument with my parents early on, right after I left, as a way of kind of softening them. I think, I argued that, look, if the end comes and I see all of the prophecies that you believed are imminent happen, I will believe again. Totally. If I see the United Nations turn on religion, if that happens, that's probably enough evidence for me to become a Jehovah's Witness again. That's a crazy enough thing to happen that they got right, where I would have to seriously consider going back. And if that's the case, if you believe in a God of love, he should know that this was an honest, that's what I needed to see to believe it, and that seemed to resonate with my parents. They had no pushback on that. And it was right around the time that doctrine was changing. I don't remember if it was right before or right after, but it was right kind of around that time. And both of my parents have always had a problem with the teaching that every non-witness would get killed at Armageddon. That's just something that's never sat right with them. And I think probably we'll get more into this in the podcast about different ways of approaching conversations with witnesses, but I don't think most witnesses think that. I think A few do. There's some like hardcore sort of fire and brimstone witnesses who take that view, who think that humans are like worms who deserve death, and it's like just a miracle that God would allow anyone into a paradise earth at all who's, you know, committed a single sin in their life. But I don't really think that's the majority view, at least not in my experience. That wasn't. And so I think there's maybe a little bit of daylight there to work with people.
Yeah, I kind of want to just super briefly touch on that point, because I used to call those like witnesses like Calvinist witnesses who are like everyone's damned, like, you know.
That's really funny, because I used to have a term. I used to talk about Protestant witnesses versus like Catholic witnesses or whatever, but in my mind that was like the like touchy-feely witnesses versus like the more like hellfire witnesses or something.
Yeah, and I think everyone kind of generates these terms, right? Like they see how even within the cult there's diversity of like secret beliefs that people have. Like I've always held the belief of universal salvation. I was like, there's no way. There's no way that God would destroy everyone. And I guess for me, it's always been interesting that you see that level of diversity, even within like a high control group. So again, like you said, I think we'll talk about this later on, definitely in like higher detail and resolution. But I think just off the top, I think it's super interesting.
And now, for reasons known only to the poet himself, a heretical haiku by Nick Barron.
Look, Pomos, Exmos, we're free to build based beliefs. We're new heretics. So what's the worst thing about Jehovah's Witnesses?
Oof. Okay, so I feel like I have to kind of caveat that it's twofold, right? Policy and then personal. And I think those two can converge, but I think I do have to make that discrepancy. Policy-wise, their handling of CSA, child sex abuse. It's abhorrent. It is horrible. The fact that they have a problem that is greater than most other clergy, given that they are such a minority in terms of like religious sects. What is it, like 800,000 or something like that worldwide?
Oh, million. Yeah, it's like 9. I don't know. Might be 9 million, 8.5 million, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like
the latest number. Well, we're not even getting numbers anymore, so I don't think so. Now that people aren't recording their time, which they could have gotten rid of when I was still a witness, I would have appreciated that.
Same.
But
yeah, there's little things like that too, right? Like policy changes. Like now people, I mean, for those who know, like now women can wear pants before they could only wear skirts, and now men can grow out their beards. You might be thinking, if you're not familiar with the witnesses, you might be like, what the hell are they talking about? But yeah, there's like all these little legalistic rules about how you can act, dress, wear, behave, who you can talk to, who you can't talk to. All of these things, they're not always explicit. Sometimes they're implicit, or sometimes they're just either, how would I say them? Like cultural norms. So maybe it's nothing that even the organization per se endorses, but they also don't enforce anything against that type of thinking. So for me, yeah, child sex abuse, I think, super bad. And just the way that they even approach the whole thing. They've had a couple of legal cases, movements. The most famous one, the one that has woken up a lot of people, is the Australian Royal Commission. For more details on that, I would just look up the Australian Royal Commission. I'm not an expert by any means on Jehovah's Witness legal cases, but it just goes to show, if you want like concrete proof or concrete evidence that the organization has a serious problem with child sex abuse, I would look up the Australian Royal Commission.
And shout out to all of the ex-witness activists who have really done a lot of great work exposing this. A lot of victims have come out, and that obviously takes a tremendous amount of courage to not only be willing to stand up against a powerful and rich organization like Jehovah's Witnesses, but also just to share such intimate stories, these unbelievably traumatic events in life, and to have to revisit those in order to try to make some progress for other people who are still in the group, other children who might be exposed. There's been just a lot of great work on that, and I think one of the things I really appreciated after I woke up over the last year or two was the amount of kind of legwork that's being done, like on the legal front, to try to combat some of these policies and rein back in some of the crazier sort of stuff that they've put into place that's really allowed pedophiles to flourish within the very high walls of the organization.
Absolutely. I think it would warrant like a whole episode. I mean, there's just so much to talk about on that whole aspect altogether.
Yeah.
And then the personal one, right? The one, the one that's a bit more maybe applicable to me for selfish reasons, right? So because I do feel for the CSA, and I think because I've had the privilege to never have been a victim of something like that. It's not as real to me, even though I understand that it's a horrific thing. I think because it's not something I've experienced, it's not as tangible. But something that I have in a soft way experience has been the shunning practice, whether or not you're disfellowshipped or faded, or, as long as it seems that you are kind of distant or disassociating from the group, there is going to be some level of shunning. There's always going to be hard shunning, formal shunning, because you've disassociated or been reprimanded by the organization, what they call disfellowshipping. Or there's always going to be soft shunning, which is individuals see that you are not in good standing. You've not been formally reproved or disfellowshipped in any way, shape, or form. And so they just act as if you are disfellowshipped. Essentially, they don't know how to behave with you. You're kind of in this gray, muddy area. And so you're just kind of pushed out of the social groups. And I think for me, that's kind of one of the worst aspects of it, because there's a lot of holes to poke about the type of reformation that the organization needs. But I think the biggest one would have to be their shunning practice. Alongside reformation with child sex abuse, I think the next one up would be their shunning practice. I think that keeps a lot of people in. I actually think the organization, the cult, would actually become more normal and would flourish if they actually weren't so strict regarding the tightrope that they have regarding whether one can leave the group with grace or not.
It's interesting you say that. This may be controversial for some ex-witnesses to hear, but there are some things about JW theology, the messaging, that is really appealing to people. The idea of living on a paradise earth is an appealing idea. That's why they lead with that really, yep. in the preaching work, right? And it is something, I think, that is more tangible to a lot of people than traditional Christian theology. I think the idea of living in heaven is something that seems very abstract to a lot of people, or being with God or something like that. It's just this, it's the kind of a hard, now there's some people that really like that sort of more abstract sort of theology, and that's really what appeals to them. But I do think there is a kind of more concrete thinker who can really like see themselves like building their dream house like on a paradise earth, and that's like a really appealing message. And it's just the witnesses build all this other stuff into it on the back end that really makes it into a cult, and not just kind of a I don't know, maybe a different view of the hope of Christianity. Without getting into things like the Trinity or some of the other really specific like theological differences that we'll no doubt be discussing on this pod. So yeah, for me, the worst thing, I'll approach it the way that you did. I like how you set that up. I think the worst single kind of like policy, in addition to the way that they handle CSA, would be the blood transfusion issue, the blood issue generally. I think it's horrible theology. I think it's nonsensical interpretation of the Bible. I think it's stupid. I think it kills people. My dad was on the HLC for a number of years, and it really messed him up. He was not really the type of person, I don't think, maybe, I don't know who is the type of person that really is good at that job. But I mean, what those guys are asked to do, to go to hospitals on the, to just drop everything the second a tragedy is unfolding, somebody's bleeding out in a hospital, and these guys need to leave their families and go to a hospital and basically be there to enforce Jehovah's Witness policy that they are not to take a blood transfusion. I mean, that's why they're there. It's really to make sure that doesn't happen. I mean, they can't force it to happen. They can't keep a family from doing that. But even just their presence there is like this looming threat that if you get a blood transfusion, the congregation is going to know about it. And that to me is so messed up. It's completely against any kind of like normal, like good medical practice. Like I'm really surprised actually that there's as many doctors who tolerate working with the HLC, or like even are reasonable with them at all. Like if I was a doctor, it would be something that would just infuriate me. I would be I'd be throwing the HLC guys out like Jesus threw the money changers out of the temple or something. So that's infuriating, awful, messed up, has killed countless tens of thousands of witnesses, and including children. So it's hard to say that objectively that's not maybe one of the worst things about the organization. Personally, since I haven't so much been affected by that myself, other than the way that my dad was affected by it, I think for me, the worst thing about being probably in any cult, but I think maybe Jehovah's Witnesses are especially bad about this, is their insistence that you devote your life to the cult at the sacrifice of doing things that make you happy, pursuing your talents, pursuing education. I know so many smart, talented witnesses, musicians, like talented artists, like unbelievably talented, like speakers and teachers, and people who could do all kinds of things for their life, with their life, to benefit their community, to add beauty to the world. And instead they go and knock on doors and try to convert people to Jehovah's Witnesses. And it's just a complete waste of their talent, of their time, and of their life. And that was something that I'm feeling now. At 41, I feel like I look back and I'm like, man, I missed all these opportunities that I could have had to pursue all kinds of talents and interests that I had. I played saxophone in high school. I went to school for English. I've always had aspirations to be a writer. Even in my career, I hit a point in my career. I was teaching and tutoring writing in higher ed, but I hit a wall where I needed a master's degree to really make like a career out of it. And I had already felt like I had sort of been rebellious, even getting a bachelor's degree as a witness in the first place, because we were really discouraged from going to higher ed. So I just never really could come around on the idea of going back to school for more education. and the organization throughout my life has actively discouraged that from happening. So how much more so would they be against going for a grad degree or something? And with the sole purpose of building a career. Like these are things that are almost like heretical to JW theology. And in hindsight, my life would have taken a completely different turn. I'd be in a much better place today had I pursued some of these goals and not devoted so much time to the preaching work that I did as a JW. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I think like you said, I think there's so much potential that people have, and they kind of throw it all away. And I will play devil's advocate and say there's some people who it genuinely does give them joy to kind of devote themselves to what they perceive as a higher purpose. Something like, oh, I'm doing it for God. I'm doing it. They don't even see it as they're doing it for the organization, which ultimately they are doing it for the cult. But the material aspect is they are doing it for a physical organization here on earth. But the way that they kind of rationalize it is that they're doing it for God. They're giving something up for God. But absolutely, I think there's so many opportunities that people had. Even like you said, I think we're kind of oddballs out on this because they discourage higher education so much that it's kind of crazy that either of us even have any sort of collegiate background.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that was fairly controversial when I was going because my dad was an elder. And I was, like I said, I was disfellowshipped twice, kind of bookending my time in college. And so there were a lot of kind of whispers about how college was probably the reason for that, even though it totally wasn't. I had we'll probably end up discussing this sometime down the road, but, by far the worst stuff I've done in my life was with other witnesses, and almost as a direct result of being a witness, of trying to get around rules or trying to deal with like the sort of intellectual fallout of our belief system, and still trying to do things that we wanted to do. And I've never experienced I have way more messed up stories and experiences from within the organization than anything that I ever experienced outside.
It's always like the loopholes, right, that make you like objectively a worse moral human being. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that statement a lot.
All right, so I guess it kind of dovetails into this. What's the cultiest thing you ever did?
Oof, the cultiest thing. It's kind of weird because I didn't spend too much time. I mean, I know I spent like a big portion of my childhood and into my teen years as a witness. Probably the weirdest thing that I can think of, at least, was trying to convert my best friend. There was a point where I got in high school where everybody was telling me, you got to get baptized. You got to stop hanging out with your schoolmates. You got to stop hanging out with worldly people. They're called worldly people because obviously they're from the world. They're not from within the organization, the cult. So because they're not, they're outsiders. They're worldly. So I was advised by pretty much everyone, all my other friends.
It's almost synonymous with evil.
Yeah.
I think that's fair to say. I think a witness, when they say somebody's worldly, they're saying they're immoral. They're bad, some sort of bad evil person.
There's even that like my Bible stories book, which is like a little kid indoctrination handbook, which talks about an experience where it's this one lady. Her name's Dina. If anybody knows the Old Testament, she actually is a victim of rape, but it's kind of pretty close to explicitly stated that it's her fault because she chose to hang out with at what at her time would have been considered, in quotes, worldly people or outsiders, people who were not Israelites.
Yeah, that's what you get for hanging out with all those rapey worldlies.
So yeah, because at the time I had a lot of friends both in and out. And I kind of look back and I'm like, man, I'm so glad that I had people out, because I think that kind of helped my transition. And so far as that, I try to convert my best friend. I don't know how that all really panned out. I think a lot of other extraneous factors kind of dissolved our friendship. It wasn't just reduced to, our friendship falling out wasn't just reducible to me trying to convert him. I think it was a bunch of other factors. But I think one of the contributing factors was the fact that I was trying to convert him, trying to get him to stop doing things that by even by normal people standards would have been seen as like problematic. Like he was doing a lot of drugs, alcohol as a teenager, which is normal, but I think he was doing it to the extent that it was actually being detrimental, like even to our peers. Our peers were very concerned with him. And so because of that, I think in a way I was trying to say like, oh, well, this is a way that I can continue my friendship with you. And at the same time, it's obviously keeping you from getting in trouble. But I think that was the cultiest thing, trying to like really almost forcibly try to like, even to the point where it was like, dude, come on, just come to the meeting so that I can keep hanging out with you. It was like, oh, you can spend the night if you go to church with me tomorrow. And he would, and we'd hang out, and we'd hang out all day, and it would be awesome. But looking back now, it's so weird that I rationalized people having that level of control with like my friendships, who I chose to even hang out with.
Dude, I am so much cultier than you. You have no idea. I brought not only my best friend in high school into the truth, like where he actually got baptized and is still a witness to this day. I also brought my worldly girlfriend into the truth as a teenager, and she also got baptized.
Oh man!
So yeah, yeah, she's out. Fortunately,
is that the cultiest thing that you have done, or
that's not even the cultiest thing? No, I don't think. That's pretty culty though. So I don't. I hadn't even thought about that being. I was thinking more about stuff like that I did that affected me personally or something. But yeah, I guess if you bring others in, that's probably about as culty as you can get.
Because you're drinking the Kool-Aid, but then you have to.
Yeah.
Other people try to drink it.
Right, and I mean, it also means, I guess, it's a testament to how convincingly culty I was too. I actually got people convinced in this thing. No, I think for me, probably the cultiest thing was that the second time I got disfellowshipped, the first time I got disfellowshipped, I came back in pretty quick. The second time I got disfellowshipped, it was a much harder process, and I was finishing up college at the time. And I was fully convinced that the end was about to come. It was right around the time that Obama got elected. And he was using a lot of rhetoric that to me sounded like fulfillment of Bible prophecy. He was using, in his inauguration speech, I remember vividly, he used the term peace and security, which to anyone that's ever been a Jehovah's Witness, they know that term peace and security, which is a verse in Thessalonians, witnesses take as a prophecy that will signal the beginning of the end, basically. They believe that the nations will declare peace and security in some way. It's going to be some kind of a significant declaration, and that will kick off a series of events that will ultimately lead to the Battle of Armageddon, which will bring about God's kingdom on earth. I was like fully convinced that, after 9/11, as we got through the Iraq War, there was, I was graduating at a time when the financial crisis was like in full swing in 2008, 2009, the housing crisis. And Obama comes into office and he's talking, and he's throwing around this term peace and security, which witnesses have had on their radar since like the 70s or 80s, right? Maybe even before that. So I just thought it was over. I thought like there's not enough time for me to come back. And we were just talking about how the witnesses have actually changed their doctrine on this now. But that doctrine, the fact that I thought I had to be an active baptized witness in good standing when the Great Tribulation breaks out. And I thought that the Great Tribulation could break out literally any day as soon as I was disfellowshipped. Like I thought we were like right there. And so I was suicidal. And it's I think to this day it's like pretty amazing that that I'm still sitting here. I was really bad off. I was really mentally ill. I was drinking a lot, and I had nobody really to help me. Fortunately, my mom stepped in and got permission from the elders, which she felt like she had to do to even help me with my mental health at the time. But I also went through a series of basically pleas to the elder body and to the circuit overseer, eventually begging for somebody to help me through this process, because I just felt like I was like right at the edge. I didn't know from day to day, like if I was going to make it or not. And I was able to get through it, largely with the help of mental health experts and medication and therapy, and not at all through any sort of spiritual means. But even then, even after having been through that, I still didn't fully wake up until it was another like 15 years later. So I ended up getting reinstated. And when I got reinstated after that episode, those tough like 3 years, that was probably the height of my like indoctrination. That was probably, I went through a period of like 5 years where I was doing the preaching work, 30 to 50 hours a month, almost every month for a number of years. I was working toward being a ministerial servant, which is sort of a promotion in JW world. And I got married and was trying to be a good Christian husband to my wife and whole thing. So like, yeah, that was like the period where I got the most indoctrinated. But yeah, I think the idea now in hindsight that I would have killed myself over a Bible prophecy, an interpretation of a Bible prophecy, that now they don't even really hold to, is about as culty as it gets, I think.
I was going to say, it's probably also like, I don't know, maybe you can speak to this, but I feel like if it was something like so traumatic in a sense, the fact that they flip-flopped on that must be like kind of like maddening, or like what the F, man.
It's been super upsetting because there's a number of things that I used to argue with people over, where they're using my same arguments now, changing some of these policies. So, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one who saw some of these like flaws in their logic or whatever, but I think that's been like super mad. Like, I mean, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses forever, until very recently, for like 100 years, they had to report how many hours per month they would put into the preaching work. And that was a sort of objective way of like measuring someone's spirituality, right? It was like, oh, well, if somebody puts in a lot more hours preaching in a month, then that means that person sort of is objectively a more spiritual person, right? Years ago, like going back, like, I don't know, into my 20s, like I had problems with this. I could never see any kind of scriptural justification for why we had this practice and why we should be sort of ranking people or judging people based off of how much time they put into the ministry. Now, witnesses will claim they don't really do that, but they totally do. I mean, anybody who's ever tried to reach out in the congregation, who they're a brother, they want to use them as a ministerial servant or as an elder in the congregation, there is a minimum amount of hours they need to be putting in the preaching work in order to be even considered. And the term was exemplary. You had to be considered exemplary. Now, of course, none of this is in the Bible at all. And as a religion that claims to uphold essentially sola scriptura, they believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God and the final authority for all doctrine. It's a big problem even within their own framework that something like how many hours you get in service was held to such a high esteem, and was completely abiblical. So there were things like that I saw. And honestly, in hindsight, a lot of these doubts I got from my dad, who was an elder, who's still an elder, was an elder for decades. But he used to tell me that, pioneers, which for those who don't know, a pioneer is someone who gets, it's changed over the years, but I think currently it's 50 hours a month. It used to be 70. It was 90 before that. But it's sort of like a full-time minister is what they consider it. That's like the people who are kind of spearheading the preaching work. They might be something like a missionary, except they're not like sent abroad. They're just in their local area or congregation. But my dad used to say stuff like the pioneers just go out and service that much time for the title and for like the accolades and stuff. And this was like a person who was supposedly like a, devout member of the congregation. And pioneering is like something and pioneers they're held up by the organization. And it's like basically kids, if you're growing up as a witness, kids are indoctrinated to believe that like pioneering is like the ultimate goal for your life. Like that's like the best thing you can do with your life.
It's like pioneering so that you can go to the college version of witnesses, which is hopefully one day you can get invited or be able to submit an application to go to Bethel.
Yep. Or Gilead. Yeah, there's a few schools. But basically, the entry to all of that stuff is pioneering. Like, unless you're a pioneer, you can't really apply to or have any kind of like aspirations to do anything more interesting than just knocking on doors, like in your local area. That's basically all you have to look forward to, and giving some talks at the Kingdom Hall. So for my dad to be like cynical about that stuff, I think it's definitely, I should give him some credit. I think he hasn't woken up yet totally, but I think there's some inklings that he may be in the process of doing that now. We'll probably get into this in some future episodes, because what's going on with my parents right now, and a few of my XJW buddies on Twitter have heard a little bit about this, but I think they might be starting a sort of waking up process. And so there might be kind of an ongoing set of updates I might give to our audience on kind of how that is going, because I think there's something to be learned here for all of us who are ex-cult members in how to wake people up and what sort of works and what doesn't often work. And I'm sort of learning that in real time. I'm not claiming to have like some kind of expertise in this area, just that I think if people like my parents can leave, I think anybody can wake up.
Yeah, definitely. I think we'll talk about this obviously as the pod progresses, but like you said, I think just knowing the different tactics, knowing the different personal weak points, because I think you bring up a good point here with like what is the Achilles heel for each individual in terms of their spirituality, in terms of their belief system, and everybody has these. And it's kind of like knowing how to like hijack those like triggers. For my family, we grew up super close knit, like super, super close knit. There was no way that if my sister or I ever got disfellowship that our parents were going to shun us. They would end up being disfellowship before they stopped talking to us. And that.
So you were the Achilles heel.
Yeah. My parents would choose me over the organization. Anyway. Yeah. And I think similarly, kind of with my sister, I've seen that with her. She has the same mentality. She's never going to stop talking to me. And so that's kind of a way that I've been able to leverage that relationship. My sister for the longest time, I think she was kind of the last one to kind of lean into her doubts. She's what you would call physically in, but mentally out. For extraneous circumstances, she cannot leave, primarily being that her spouse is an elder, so he holds a pretty high status within the organization, at least locally. But I mean, his Achilles heel, a way to get at him, is that he loves his wife. He loves my sister. The fact that they're still together, even though she's openly admitted to him that she doesn't believe, she doesn't care for it. She kind of just appeases that aspect by saying, I'll be respectful, I'll still go to meetings, you don't have to worry about that, but I don't care for it. Like, don't try to force it. Don't try to get me to reason to come back or anything like that, like, or believe in it. I just don't. And the fact that he's been amicable towards that and not gotten irate or angry or depressed or anything like that, I think has been at least shown that he's at least willing to. It's like, how much ground are they willing to cede, right? How much are they willing to give up to maintain other relationship aspects, intellectual integrity or psychological, emotional integrity. And I think, like, in this case, clearly my sister is kind of his weak point. So I don't want to say that I formally have been trying to get him to wake up, but that's kind of like that's my like, I know I could probably do it. I don't actively do it because that's another thing we should probably talk about later on, which is like active versus passive heresy or apostasy, whatever we want to call it, which is, there's a way to be tactful in how you behave and what you say. And then there's a way to be direct, and both of those have their time and place and their responses.
Yeah, 100%. I sort of stumbled onto this term soft apostasy the other day in a conversation that we were having. And I think I've sort of amended it to something like passive apostasy. And I think that's going to be a theme that's going to come up on this podcast. And maybe this is a good time to just jump into, why are we doing this? And like, so based on these experiences that we've just laid out, kind of where we're at, I think people probably have a pretty good sense of that. Now, what are we doing here that's different than the content that exists currently?
Please listen closely as Logo loses us.
Yet what is impossible in logic becomes true in life, and the contradiction lodged within the soul tears it to shreds. Simone Weil.
Passive apostasy is something that I want to advocate for. As you said, there's kind of a time and a place for even that method, though. And I'm not even entirely sure what that method is yet. This is kind of in progress, right? We're sort of developing things as we go. And that's, I think, something I want to get across here early on to anybody who thinks they might be interested in sticking with us or jumping in at some point, is that I don't have the answers to what to do after you leave, or what sort of worldview you should have, or how you should go about living your life, or what your morality should be, or any of these things. If you want like some sort of definitive answers to those questions, this probably isn't the pod for you. I think what we are interested in doing is focusing more on how to think, how to rebuild your life. Like, what are the questions that you should be asking as you have certain feelings come up, as you have certain questions about how to move forward, as you start thinking about things like, what is my morality? What is, like, do I still believe in the Bible or not? Do I believe in a God or not? These have profound impacts on people's lives. And I think that there is, and this, I think there's a tendency, and this is something that I went through. I think you went through too, and you can speak to that also. But there's a tendency when you leave a high control group and something with a transcendent ideology, right? Something that explains everything, right? You always have an answer to every question because your ideology explains it all, right? If you lose that and you realize, no, this was like all bullshit, it's really hard to not fall into nihilism and to just sort of throw up your hands and say, well, nothing matters. There is no truth. in the world. There is no such thing as morality. I might as well just live however I want, or do whatever feels good. And I almost think it's kind of inevitable that that's kind of the first reaction. At least I think for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, I think this is probably true for ex-Mormons and some others, that like you're so ingrained with the idea that everybody else doesn't have the truth. There is, like, if it's not you, it's nobody, right? Like, and I see a real danger in that. And I like the first 6 months or a year, that was kind of my mentality. I got onto Twitter and got in a lot of debates, a lot of fights, and I was ready to tear it all down, burn everything down. You know, everything is a joke. There is no truth, whatever. And I just see that happening to a lot of people that leave. And now that I have a little bit of distance, thanks to some of the conversations that we've had, you've been super helpful here, and we'll get more into that and why that's been the case. And others that I've had an opportunity to meet, and people who are a little bit further along in the deconstructing process than I was. I think that there's a spot in ex-cult activism for some other ideas, for ways of going about rebuilding a life and rebuilding a worldview and an ideology, and how to do that in healthy ways that might provide some alternatives to just like pure vulgar nihilism.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think that the tendency, at least, is to have some sort of reactivity. Usually, not always. Some people do still uphold. How would I say this? Some people still uphold some sort of Christianity or transcendent value, and they go that route, and whatever they kind of can cling on to, and that helps mold their life. But I think a big one that we've seen, and like you said, that we can attest to, is kind of this nihilism that kind of broods up. It's like you said, if I don't have the truth, then no one has the truth. And absolutely, I think that the main reason we kind of wanted to do a pod like this is to kind of, there's so many accounts, there's so many content creators, activists, there's those who actually do the legal activism. They have the foots on the ground. They're doing what I would consider genuine activism. They're talking to senators. They're testifying in court cases. Genuine pressure to kind of force the cult's hand, so to speak. Then I would call what's like raising awareness or awareness activism, which is kind of pretty popular around social medias, which would be like raising awareness that the Jehovah's Witnesses aren't the happy-go-lucky Christian group that everybody thinks. Same thing with Mormons. People usually are like, oh, they're just the weirdos that knock early on people's doors, and they're like, oh, do you want to talk about Jesus Christ? And that's kind of the mainstream understanding of what Jehovah's Witnesses are, right? The people that knock at your house, and there's a sense of raising awareness that, oh no, it's a little bit more treacherous than that, right? There's a little bit more to that. It's a little bit more sinister than initially meets the eye. So I really like how you put it, that this may be not the media outlet, so to speak, to kind of deconstruct the cults in that sense. We're not here to kind of advocate for like formal activism, how you should live your life, what how you should even approach certain aspects of your life. What we're trying to provide is based on our minimal or anecdotal experience, kind of what's worked for us, and kind of using that as a voice, perhaps, to kind of help others, and then providing a little bit of a twist to that, based on our backgrounds. I think that we are at different parts in our deconversion process, but I think based on our conversations and our dynamic, I think we've shown that that there's a conversation to be had about what's next, like what's after the cult, right? And not just that, but what's after leaving the cult. So what comes after being an XJW? What comes out after being an ex-Mormon? Where do I go?
Right, because if you're still just, if that's your identity, if you leave and your identity is now I'm an XJW, have you really left? Like, right, we want, like, I want to be like Nick. I don't want to be an XJW. You know, I want to be a person, and this may be a bit more of an issue for people who are born and raised into high control groups and transcendent ideologies that leave. That I think for a lot of us, we really have no sense of identity after we leave. It's like we were witnesses. It's like in our blood. I think I said earlier. It's like it is almost like my DNA has like, you know, Jehovah like inscribed into it or something like that. And so I think probably a lot of people can relate with me on that it's like, I have like personality, like characteristics. I have like traits and things like that, but like, I don't know what I like, who I fundamentally am as a human being. Like, what are my core values if I've lost all of those in this deconversion process, right? This deconstruction process. Like, and so I think there's something super valuable in a place where we can explore how to like sort of be self-critical enough to analyze like yourself, like kind of what's actually important to you, what was only important to you because of your indoctrination or because of the expectations that other people had on you or whatever. But that also doesn't mean that just like anything that feels natural to you might be a great idea or might be a healthy way to live either, right? Like we all have flaws still, and we all have tendencies that take us in bad directions. And so I think it's important to acknowledge those things as well. And if you're just constantly living your life in a way to just be an ex-JW, I think that's also problematic. Like I don't think that everything that I learned as a Jehovah's Witness or every belief that I have necessarily needs to be thrown out just because I leave the cult. I think there are certain things about how I treat people and how I interact with people that I learned from being a witness that I think are helpful to me. I don't, so, and we'll get more into all of that, but I think, I think there is a need for a space like this to explore in a really like intellectually like rigorous and honest way, different worldviews and ideologies and options for when you leave, and what the sort of intellectual baggage is that those beliefs carry. Because I think this is maybe one of the most kind of core ideas that's been profound to me once I left, is that there is no perfect ideology. There is no perfect way to live life. Nobody has the sort of golden key, the golden ticket, the transcendental like truth of everything. Even if a religion like Christianity is true in some way, like the people that believe it are not perfect. They do not have the perfect set of ideals or teachings necessarily. And all of these things, because they're all imperfect, they all carry with them an intellectual price tag of some sort. There are certain concessions that you're going to have to make. There's certain intellectual like pills you're going to have to swallow or whatever, like, if you're going to believe those things. And I think one of our goals on the show is we just want to talk about what those are. It's not even that I want to make a lot of arguments for or against different positions, as much as just be honest about what those positions are and what the intellectual price tag is for holding that position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big one, because like you say, it's not so many people leave and they form their identity around being an XJW that then they extrapolate some of their thinking to other aspects of their life. So they leave and it's like, well, if this was a cult, then how far does a cult go? Is it secret deep state societies? You know, they're more, they tend to be more susceptible to conspiracy theories, regardless of whether or not the conspiracy has any basis in truth or not. That's not even what I'm advocating. I'm just simply stating that they may be more amicable towards that type of thinking. They may ultimately even, for example, say, well, if this is my experience with Christianity, then all Christianity must be bad, right? It must all be trash. It must all have faulty ground to stand on. And so I really like what you mentioned, where it's like all of it has a price tag. All ideology, all beliefs have a price tag. And we can definitely get more into this. I know that we've had really intense and deep conversations about this. But ultimately, it's like, what are you okay with accepting? What are you at the core of all of your beliefs? What are you okay with? And if you're okay with that, then ultimately, that speaks to you. Not to say like that's your truth, man, but that ultimately is what you're gonna value, irrespective of truth or not, irrespective of truth staring you right in the face.
Yeah, and something that I think is potentially something a little bit different that we can do on this pod is be open to debate. I don't see a ton of debate happening in ex-cult activism. It generally tends to be more of like really specifically targeted toward criticism of the former cult, deconstructing the beliefs, almost sort of like cheerleading those who have left. And I think there's a place for all of that. This is by no means a denigration of any of that material. And a lot of that stuff was super helpful to me when I was waking up. You definitely go through a process when you start really addressing your doubts and really getting like honest about them. That stuff is invaluable to you as affirmation that you're on the right track. And there is a ton of good material out there. And so we don't really feel like we have a lot to add there, I think.
Absolutely.
I think there's, we could get, I don't necessarily want to name specific content creators or different kinds of content, but anybody that's in ex-cult activist circles or who has woken up from a cult knows that there is like a lot of stuff that's really been beneficial to them, that help them to see beyond the propaganda in the cult and some of the walls that get built up and see some of the actual like real stuff that's been covered up by these groups or doctrines that have changed or been super problematic, whatever. Personal life stories and all the trauma that these groups have caused, all of that stuff is like super beneficial. So in no way are we saying that like those things are useless or not of value in some way. We just want to provide a different lane. Once you've kind of gone down that path, I feel like in a lot of cases, at least for me, this was the case. It was pretty quick. It was like, I consumed a lot of content. I started binging stuff. I'm on the XJW subreddit and I'm watching Lloyd Evans videos. Shout out to Lloyd, not super popular anymore, right? And Caleb and Altworldly and a lot of guys have been like, were hugely like important to me in my like waking up process. But I got through that stuff fairly quickly, and then I was just sort of left with like, now what? Like I don't know. Okay, so that's all bullshit. Cool. But all I sort of was left with for a while was just kind of like anger, or like, I don't know, some combination of anger and like nihilism, like I said, and it may be some kind of a desire to just sort of want to attack the cult. Maybe I think other people might be able to relate to that kind of a thing. Maybe an idea that I wanted to like rescue people out of it. Like I need to, like tell people that they need to get out of this thing. It's like evil, right? These are all totally understandable reactions, and there's even a time and place for probably all of that. But I'm finding as I get a little more distance now, and I think other people might relate to this, that I need to replace that with something. I need to replace my former beliefs with a new set of principles and beliefs that are true to me and that I find to be a healthy way to live my life. A way to live my life that's going to make me and my wife happy, and that feels grounded. And I think there's space to do more of that. And I think a big part of exploring these ideas too is being open to debate and having different ideas on. We're going to have guests on who I am going to adamantly disagree with. You and I have a fair amount of disagreements about a whole range of things. We don't even have the same basic agreement on the nature of morality, whether morality is objective or subjective. We have a disagreement about that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that's maybe a bit unique about what we're doing here, is that you and I can debate some of this stuff out for our audience. We can have on guests who don't agree. We might have on a Christian a guest, and they can present an argument for different kinds of Christianity potentially. So nothing on this pod will really be an advocacy for any particular worldview or ideology, but rather just I think through a more sort of rational approach, a more open-minded approach, and a willingness to debate ideas that we might find uncomfortable and to discuss them, that can be a real help to get us out of the cult mentality. Because the cult mentality tells you can't consider outside ideas. You shouldn't consider them. You shouldn't engage with people who are apostates, right? Who are heretics, because they might destroy your faith or something to that effect, right? And I think once we leave, it can be easy to just slide into a new cult or a new kind of dogmatic way of thinking, even if that dogmatic way of thinking is just being an ex-cult member, like I was saying. And so we really want to do something to provide an open space and platform for people to explore all kinds of ideas and to debate them.
A lot of people, when they leave, they just whatever reactionary behavior they have, they'll kind of map it onto what they're going to believe next, whether or not that's, like you said, another cult, another form of thinking, conspiratorial thinking, whether or not they just even choose to kind of shut off their critical thinking again and kind of coast and say, well, if that wasn't the truth, that was all false, then maybe the reactionary opposite is true. Maybe scientism is true. Maybe, XYZ belief about contemporary culture is true. Maybe I should advocate for, maybe I should do the exact opposite of everything that the organization was telling me, because I was so miserable inside the organization, inside of the cult, maybe by doing the exact opposite, I'll be happy. And like you said, I think you mentioned earlier, I think there's some truth to that, where some of it, you're maximizing your potential. But I think in some cases, and maybe we can talk about some of those even personal experiences, are detrimental. Just to speak super quickly about it. Like, for example, some people's marriages collapse right after they deconvert. In some cases,
mine was super on the rocks for the first 6 months after I woke up, and now we're doing fine. But yeah, I mean, it was I think, and it's not uncommon. In fact, one of my JW friends, who I got into a big argument with when I told him that I was leaving, he basically ended the call by saying, laying out what my whole next couple of years were going to be like, and it included me getting divorced and getting on drugs, and he had this whole list of things that were just inevitably going to happen to me because I left Jehovah, And at first, it kind of looked like that might happen, and I even remember kind of thinking that at the time, being like, God, I need to keep my marriage together, almost just to make this, prove this guy wrong, But I mean, yeah, fortunately we're in a good place now, but these are traumatic, ground, earth shaking changes to people's lives. And that has a ripple effect on every relationship you have of any importance, of all kinds of things, your job, your lifestyle, Absolutely. All of it.
Yeah. How you think really affects every aspect of your life. And whether or not you kind of choose to address that, at a psychological, at a philosophical, at an intellectual, at an emotional level, however you choose to approach that, you have to address it. There's no there's no real getting around it. You can kind of push it to the side and coast on by, but at some point, you're going to have to tackle it head on. And again, we're not like psychologists, we're not therapists. We're not advocating a certain lifestyle or a certain way of thinking. All we're saying is that these are conversations to be had. If that means, hey, I've never even considered getting mental health help, maybe that's an avenue. Maybe that's something you should look into.
Yeah, I'm in therapy. I've been doing therapy for a couple of years. I think it has a lot of value. We have a therapist lined up who's going to be on the show, who's going to talk about the value of therapy for people who are going through these kinds of major life changes. But it's also, I don't think therapy is for everybody either. Like, I don't think necessarily I would recommend it to every person. And there are a number of things to consider there. Another big thing that comes up, this is something that's come up in my life, is should I go to college? Like, if you were raised in a cult that didn't allow you to go to college or really dissuaded you from pursuing that kind of life, a lot of people will sort of just jump in, right? Like, it'll be like, oh, I never got to go to college. That was always something I wanted to do. So like they just immediately go to college. Well, there's like a lot of things to consider with college, and both of us have been to college. I've recently applied to grad school, so I've been through that process, and I could talk some to the things that I learned going through that process. Logo is in grad school, so he can talk more about that. We both know the financial burdens that college puts on you and some of the limitations to college. So this isn't to say that I don't think either of us would say like you shouldn't go to college. I don't think either of us would probably say that you should go to college. These are just conversations that I think need to be had in with a degree of like nuance and like honesty and a kind of attention to detail that I think there's space for right now.
Yeah, absolutely. There's not much more I can kind of add to that. But yeah, I mean, it's just all we can speak about is our experience, right? And whether or not that opening our experiences up to you guys to listen to, whether or not that's helpful, I think that's kind of our main thread here, which is we see that there's a lot of recursiveness. Not that that's bad. It's just that I think because our experience has been so particularly unique, because of how we've grown up, the opportunities that were gifted to us. We've both had the privilege to have, to not be disfellowshipped, to have higher education, things like that, have support group within our family. So not even searching out support groups outside because our family doesn't necessarily shun us, things like that. We're so fortunate in that regard that because of that, we can speak to a certain degree of maybe naivety or even lucidity that maybe others don't have that privilege because they're still hung up on some baggage. And respectively, I'm not trying to say that they need to move past that baggage or whatever. Like we just have such different experiences that it would be they just haven't gotten there. They can't get there.
Yeah, and I think if that's the case, and I hope that we'll get to a point where we could have some of the different kinds of XJW activists or not even XJW, but just ex-cult activists generally, who are doing a lot of good stuff there. They're building communities of people who have been highly traumatized by these groups, and there are a lot of us. And sometimes just watching the latest broadcast and like making fun of it is a ton of fun. And and these groups deserve some ridicule. Like there's a lot of really destructive, problematic stuff they're doing and that they're pushing. So again, not to denigrate any of that content in any way. But maybe we're in a position to be able to provide a different kind of discussion and a different kind of content that could be helpful to people who are starting to work past some of that stuff and wanting to focus more on maybe who they are and how they want to live their life as it's in a way that's more true to them and not so much defined by their previous life in the cult.
Yeah, I mean, we can even kind of speak to that. Probably another like episode that we'll definitely probably end up doing is just even like the differences and beliefs that we had. And you kind of hinted at it in regards to our differences in morality, but even like just like in general, like I'm a little bit more amicable towards religiosity or even like Christianity, and that's not to say that I'm a Christian. It's just that even like our attitudes towards aesthetic sensibilities, moral sensibilities, ideological sensibilities are distinct, and I think that's in the same way that we kind of talked to the differences within the organization. That it was awesome that there were, in quotes, Calvinist witnesses. There's Catholic witnesses or what have you. Maybe there's room for X flavor of XJW, and then progressively as you move through that ladder, maybe eventually you even stop using that moniker altogether, and you're just like, well, I'm done with this. I'm just me. Let's see what that looks like.
Yeah, I talked to a fairly well-known XJW, and it was right after I woke up, and I was really desperate for just like some kind of direction on where to go. And I just shot out some DMs to a few people just to see if I got any kind of, I don't know. I didn't even know why. I don't even know why I did it. It was just kind of like, I don't know who else to turn to. I might as well turn to some other people who left. And I'll just throw something out to some people and see if I get any responses. And one person in particular responded to me, and I thought her response was like so interesting. And it's something that really stuck with me. I was asking about like activism. I think I approached it something like, what can I do to sort of like, fight back against this, this destructive ideology or whatever. And her response was basically, if I was you, I would just forget them. Like, just live your life. Like, you don't need to, define your life off of going after some group that you feel like traumatized you or that's, had this profound negative impact on you, because then you're just constantly still focused on them. And I think something that's just been so much healthier for me is focusing on what I do want to do, what I do believe, and trying to open my mind up to. There's so many ideas that I was closed off to as a witness, right? Like, there's so much philosophy I never read. There's so much, even as an English major, there's so much literature I never read. There's so many different worldviews and ideas that I never experimented with. There's so many drugs I never tried. There's just all kinds of things that like were out there that I just never, they were off limits to me, right? There was a Berlin Wall up from a huge chunk of the world. And so for me, it's just been, I think the last, I would say about, 6 months to a year, it's just been a really liberating experience to just say yes to things, just try things, to get out there and meet new people, to celebrate a holiday I never celebrated, maybe go to a church you've never been to before. I mean, just try things. And I think there's a lot of value in that. You're not committing to anything, to just explore. And I think, again, this pod, could be a way. I mean, honestly, to be in full disclosure, I'm doing this for myself as much as I'm doing it to help other people. I certainly hope that through the course of this project that we can help other people to find some answers or feel like they can move past their cult upbringing. But I have a lot of questions that I'm exploring, and I want to debate ideas with people, and I want to hear new things to consider. So for me, this pod is as much a part of my like moving on process and my kind of healthy maturation beyond the cult as it is for the audience. So. Hey, we did it. Thank you for sticking with us on this first episode. It was a little messy. We might have done some cringy stuff. I don't know. We'll see what sticks. But we're excited about the project. We hope to provide something new in the X-Cult space, and we hope that you'll get something out of it. If you agree, please like and subscribe, share, check out new episodes every Tuesday as we get started. We'll go from there when we see what kind of support the project gets. In the meantime, if you have an interest in being on the show, if you'd like to share your story, if you'd like to come on to debate us, to explore ideas, if you'd like to talk about successes that you've had in your life as an ex-cult member, or failures that you've had, or struggles, all of that would be great information, I think, that would be helpful to other people who are waking up and deconstructing from high control groups. So please contact us on Twitter. My name is Nick Barron, Baren. Handle is at Baron_Nick. You can contact us there, or at New Heretics with an X at gmail.com. And in the meantime, enjoy your freedom. You earned it.